Long ago, in the peaceful lands of Minecraft, villagers and their settlements flourished in harmony with the land. They built their homes with care, grew crops in vast fields, and lived contentedly under the watchful eyes of the wandering merchant caravans that occasionally passed through. But little did they know, a storm was brewing on the horizon, a storm that would change the fate of these peaceful folk forever. The villagers, with their love for trade, had often invited traders from far and wide to sell their wares. Among these merchants were not only peaceful traders but also ruthless businessmen, driven by greed. One of these businessmen was a man known as Vorel, a cunning merchant from a distant land. He sought to expand his wealth and influence, and he saw villagers as nothing more than pawns in his scheme. Vorel's plan was simple. He would buy up all the best resources in the land, from enchanted books to rare ores, and he would sell them at a premium to the villagers, keeping them dependent on his goods. In return, he would demand gold, emeralds, and rare artifacts, creating an imbalanced system where the villagers could never get ahead. As time went on, Vorel grew richer, and the villagers became more impoverished, their hard-earned resources slowly slipping into the hands of their so-called benevolent trader. But Vorel's greed did not stop there. He discovered that the villagers' most prized possessions were not just their emeralds, but their knowledge of the land, their mastery of farming, crafting, and building. With his growing power, he demanded that the villagers share this knowledge with him, using threats and intimidation. Villagers who refused were pushed out of their homes, their villages burned, or their crops destroyed. Vorel didn't just want wealth. He wanted complete control over the villagers' lives and labor. One by one, the villagers grew disillusioned with their once trusted merchant. The world they had known was collapsing, and Vorel's tyranny seemed unstoppable. Some villagers, however, did not want to accept their fate. They were tired of the constant manipulation, the ever-tightening grip of greed, and the despair of watching their homes and families suffer. Among these villagers, there was a leader named Vera, a skilled blacksmith who had once forged tools and weapons for the peaceful use of the community. Vera was strong-willed and defiant, and she began to rally those who were fed up with Vorel's rule. She found others, like Thorn, a former farmer whose land had been taken, and Eric, a miner whose family had been driven away by Vorel's mercenaries, and together they formed a group, calling themselves the Pillagers. They would no longer be subjugated. The Pillagers, once a band of disgruntled villagers, now found themselves transformed. They donned armor and crafted weapons from the blacksmith's forge, using their knowledge of the land against the merchant's empire. Their first raid was swift and brutal. They stormed one of Vorel's outposts, looting the traders' stockpiles of stolen goods and freeing the enslaved workers who had been forced into his service. The villagers cheered. The pillagers had struck a blow for freedom, and the idea began to spread. More and more villagers, desperate for change, joined their cause. The pillagers took to the night, raiding villages where their people were being exploited, burning the crops of corrupt traders, and stealing back what had been taken from them. They became feared across the lands, not for their cruelty, but for their desire to level the playing field. They were no longer the peaceful folk that had once tilled the soil and built humble homes. They were warriors determined to rewrite the rules of the world. But Vorel was not a fool. He soon realized that the pillagers were no longer a mere nuisance. They were a growing force. So he sent his mercenaries to track them down, to stop them before they could do more damage. The once trusted merchant became a tyrant, sending hordes of soldiers and even dangerous mobs to crush the pillagers. But each time, the pillagers adapted, learning from their encounters, crafting stronger weapons, and finding new allies. Over time, the pillagers began to see their war not just as a fight for survival, but as a fight for freedom. They were no longer mere rebels. They were revolutionaries determined to break the chains of corruption and greed that had been placed upon them. The villages they once were still lived on in their hearts, but the fire of vengeance burned bright in their eyes. As the battle between the pillagers and the villagers reached its peak, the land itself began to change. Villages were abandoned, new settlements arose, and the ancient peaceful ways of life were overshadowed by the dark march of vengeance and retribution. The world had changed, and the pillagers were no longer merely a part of it. They had become it. The pillagers still roam the land today, raiding settlements, seeking retribution, and continuing the fight for freedom. They are not merely criminals or bandits, but a symbol of rebellion against those who seek to exploit and control. Though their methods are harsh, their cause is clear. They will never again allow the villagers to be taken advantage of, and they will fight until the last trader is driven out and the world is finally free of tyranny. And so the pillagers became what they had once feared, a powerful force, reshaped by the pain of betrayal and the desire for justice.